programming with relative intensity. So, you guys know that I'm a huge fan of using relative intensity. I think it's a fantastic tool. To put this as simple as possible, what's the relative intensity of your one rep max? It's 100%. Okay. But, if you were to take 75% of your one rep max and did it for 10 reps, what's the relative intensity of that? 100%, right? Because that last rep is to failure. So, if we took 85% and did 5 reps, that last rep is, it's a 5 rep max. So that's 100% as well, right? So the relative intensity, so the absolute intensity of a 1 rep max is 100%. The relative intensity is 100%. And when you do a 3 rep max, still the relative intensity of a 3 rep max is not, it's not the same weight as your 1 rep max, obviously. You're doing it for 3 reps instead of 1, but the relative intensity is 100%. So I hope this makes sense. I'm just giving you guys a brief explanation of how this works. If you do a 5 rep max, obviously that's less load than your 1 rep max, but again, relative intensity is 100%. So I think that that's a great way for people to program, because I think that we need to consider the stress of the set, right? So if we said we're going to do 5 sets of 5 at 80%, okay, we're going to look at the relative intensity of each set and then think about that instead of saying we're going to do 5 rep max 5 times. That would be insane. No one would want to do that workout. That would be miserable. You could do that workout, but you're probably going to rest 10 to 15 minutes between those sets, which, isn't the worst thing in the entire world, but it's not a fun workout to do, okay? So this is my point, though, is that, I think that relative intensity does have a use when you are programming. However, and this is the counter to this. I'm going to give you guys like the plus and the minus, or the pro and con. So on the pro side, we're going to mitigate some fatigue and stress by being mindful about the relative intensity, right? So we're not just going to say 85% for 5 sets of 5, because that would be ridiculous. That would be, it's doable, but it's not, like, it's gonna create a lot of stress, more stress than 80% for 5 sets of 5, right? But here's the catch to this whole thing, and I don't know how you guys feel about this, but this is just my experience of my own lifting, and then also working with other people. If you do a 3 rep max, that's not nearly as fatiguing as doing a 10 rep max. Now, both of them have a relative intensity of 100%, don't they? Right? It's a 10 rep max, it's a 3 rep max. And yet, when you do that 10 rep max, I swear to God, it takes more out of you. Like, you are going to be sore the next day, and it takes a lot more out of you. And so that's the con to using relative intensity, is that sometimes I think that we look at relative intensity and people treat it too strongly as a prescriptive, if that makes sense. None of these things should ever be prescriptive, right? We need to have some flexibility in our training and some intelligence. So, if you did a 20 rep max, just one set of 20 rep max, that takes a lot more out of you than even just doing a 1 rep max or a 3 rep max. Like, it's such a different stimulus when you're doing higher reps. And so the thing I try to consider whenever I think about these things is not just, the relative intensity, but the total number of reps in the session. If we're doing 3 sets of 10 at, 70%, that's very different than us doing 3 sets of 5 at 80%, and although both of those are roughly very close in relative intensity, that 3 sets of 10 at 70% is going to take a lot more energy out of you, create a lot more fatigue, create a lot more soreness than the 3 sets of 5 at 80%. It's just the way it is, guys. Like, I don't have a scientific study to show you, oh, look at the science behind this thing. No, I don't have that for you. What I have is I have 25 years of experience of coaching, and gosh, I don't even know how many years now of lifting. And I I think that when we do higher rep sets, we have to be mindful of the fact that those higher rep sets definitely have a bigger cost whenever we're keeping the relative intensity the same. So, you know, if the relative intensity of one set, of a one set and rep scheme is 80% and the relative intensity of another one is also 80%, there's still going to be a difference in the amount of fatigue that they create based off of the number of reps that you're doing. So sometimes you're using less absolute load and doing more reps, and the relative intensity may look very similar, but the stress and the fatigue and the energy demand feels very, very different. So that's all I wanted to say on this. I just want to point out to people that, like, while I do use relative intensity whenever I write my programming, and I'm very mindful of you know, calculating those numbers, I'm also mindful of the fact that, you know, doing 3 sets of 10 with 70% feels very different than 3 sets of 5 with 80%. It's just the way it is, or 3 sets of 3 with 85% for that matter. You know, it just, like, the stress of it. I think, you know, probably the calcium ions and all this shit like that, we can get into all that if you wanted to, but, you know, there's hydrogen ions, there's calcium ions, all this stuff like that. When you're doing higher reps, I just think that it creates more metabolic byproducts, if that would, you know, if we can just use a general term, these waste products, and they make you more sore. So it's harder to recover from. And that's why you can have guys that max out every day. If you just worked up to one heavy single every day, it really wouldn't be that hard on you. I know everyone thinks, oh, you can't do Bulgarian, but it's like, well, you can if you keep the volume really low. So anyways, hope this helps. Hope that's, you know, useful in some way, shape, or form for you whenever you're writing your own programming. If you use relative intensity, you know, stop and think about the energy cost and the fatigue of doing higher reps.